Welcome to my viewers to Moments with Melinda, and I am your host, Melinda Moulton. And today I have Vermont State's Treasurer Mike Pieciak with me as my guest. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Yeah, great, Melinda. Thank you for having me.
It's so good to see you. Let me share for anyone out there who doesn't know who Mike is, because I think most of you do, but let me share with this. Mike is a husband, a proud Vermonter, and Vermont's 31st treasurer. For 6 years, Mike was the commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation under both governors, Shumlin and Scott. Mike served on the pandemic response team during COVID. And there's so much more about you, but we're going to get into that in my interview. So thank you so much for joining me. But Mike, let's start. You're a born and bred Vermonter. So let's start at the beginning. You were born in Brattleboro. Talk to us about your family and the principles and values that you learned from your family that inspired you to public service.
Yeah, well, it's a great question because I love talking about Brattleboro and I love talking about my parents too because they're both really influential in my life, both my personal life and who I am, but then also what I decided to do as a professional also. So, growing up in Brattleboro, it's a great community, particularly when I grew up in the late 80s and early and 90s, just was this community that there was a book that Hillary Rodham Clinton wrote that said it takes a village, to raise a child. And it felt like that in Brattleboro. Like there were just a lot of people in the community that were invested in me in various ways while I was a kid. And that had a profound impact. But my parents were really the example for me. They were not involved in politics. They weren't involved in local politics or state politics, but they were really invested in the community in Brattleboro. My dad is a CPA. He had a CPA firm. He worked with a lot of small businesses in town. And that idea that we had to keep our money locally, we had to support local businesses, and the value and the importance of supporting local businesses was something that was really instilled at an early age. I always tell the joke that there was this diner on Main Street that we always went to every Saturday morning. And I'd say, Dad, why do we have to come here? The food's terrible and the silverware is dirty, and he'd say that they were his client and they supported him and he was going to support them by showing up for them. So it was just a nice, sort of moment that I remember even from being 4 or 5 years old. But he was very involved in the town. He helped raise money to bring lights to the football field so we could have Friday night football games, the great community activity. He helped raise money to bring a Boys and Girls Club to Brattleboro so we could have a place for kids to hang out after school. He helped expand the golf course in Brattleboro from 9 holes to 18 holes. And that was a huge project that he spent hours and hours and hours on. And I asked him, I said, Dad, you don't even play golf. Like, why did you spend so much time on this project? And he said, Brattleboro has done so much for me and has done so much for our family that it was the least I could do to find ways to give back. And that idea of that sort of moral obligation to give back to the community for things that directly or indirectly benefited you, really stuck with me as I thought about, what I wanted to do with my career. And my mom, similarly, my mom, she was very into social justice and helping the most vulnerable people in our community. When right before she was pregnant with me in March of 1982 on St. Patrick's Day, she helped start a soup kitchen called St. Bridget's Kitchen, and she ran it for 40 years. And it started off, I think they served 12 sandwiches on that first day, and now they serve about 40,000 meals a year in the Brattleboro community. So, she was really quite dedicated to that work, and she did it quietly, day after day, year after year, helping people every way that she could. And, when I was a little kid, I'd go around with her when she would serve meals to people in Brattleboro, people that were elderly or shut in or had challenges in their lives. And no matter what the circumstance was, every single time she was loving and caring and kind and patient. And it really instilled in me this idea that everybody matters, everybody has value, and everybody deserves dignity. So when I think of that in my career, I think, how can we build a Vermont where everybody matters? How can we build an economy where everybody matters? How can we build a community where everybody matters? And those two values, that high standard of building a community where everybody matters and that idea of that moral obligation to give back, are sort of the guiding principles that I learned from my parents. And I should say my dad's a Republican, my mom's Democrat. So that was another very interesting thing growing up. And I used to joke that they used to be able to watch TV in the same room, but they no longer could.
So are your parents still alive?
My mom passed away this May, unfortunately,
I'm
and
so
my dad
sorry.
is still alive. My dad's 82 and still working every day, and doing his thing in Brattleboro.
Is he still a Republican?
He is unbelievably.
You need to work on that. You need to work
Yeah,
on that. Um, well, I'm so sorry to hear about your mother, and I actually had heard that, so I'm sorry about that, Mike. And all my best to your father.
yeah. Thank you.
So now you left Vermont to pursue your education and your law degree from the University of Miami School of Law, where you did serve as editor-in-chief of the Miami Law Review. Um, then what inspired you to return to Vermont after that, after your schooling?
Yeah, well, I knew when I wanted to go away for school, particularly law school, because had lived in Vermont and I had gone to school in the Northeast for college, and I knew I wanted to come back to Vermont. So I wanted to go somewhere else for a while. I thought South Florida, Miami would be a great place. It was a great school and great location, and I really enjoyed my time there. And, I envisioned coming back and working at a law firm in Vermont or doing something like a prosecutor or some kind of way to sort of use your legal career to sort of get some experience. And then I learned, all these, I had a good first year in law school. And then a lot of folks at the school were suggesting, you should be applying to these big firms and you should be getting, in Miami or New York or whatever. And for me, a big firm was like Downs, Rackland, Martin in Vermont. It was like 100 people, right? And then all of a sudden, there are these firms that have thousands and thousands of people worldwide and these mega things. And I didn't even know anything about them. But I thought, well, that might be interesting experience. So I first looked at Miami, and it wasn't a great fit. I didn't want to stay in Miami long term. And Miami, those law firms wanted you to commit to being in the community for a long time. But then I settled on New York City. I was like, that'd be a great place. It's very transient. People come and go. They don't expect you to be there forever. And I was fortunate to get an offer at a firm there. So right after law school, I actually went and worked in New York for a few years before coming to Vermont. Again, I always knew I wanted to come back to Vermont, but I also wanted to try to get some experience, both working in a big city, living in a big city, being a lawyer in a big city. You're working with a lot of bright people. You're working with a lot of big clients, and it kind of instilled a really good perspective on like what you need to do to get things done and what you need to do to get really big and challenging things done. So it was a really helpful experience for me to have for a couple of years, but not something I certainly want to do long term.
And at Downs Rackland, you probably were in corporate and finance law, right? Which,
Yeah, so I came back to Vermont and worked at Downs Rackland for a couple of years and worked in their business law group. So it was
right.
business transactions, mergers and acquisitions, corporate matters of that kind. And I ended up, I was inspired to become a lawyer from the movie My Cousin Vinny, if you remember that movie
Yes, I
from
do.
the early 90s. So I just loved that movie. And I don't know. I talked to my mom about it later, and she said, well, that makes sense because Vinny was supporting the little guy that, the system was coming down on. And I said, okay, I think that's probably it in the kernel of it. But I liked the idea of being in the courtroom and and presenting the case and the logical arguments and everything. But then I found out like lawyers don't do that very often, right? They're not often in the courtroom. So many things settle. And so I thought business law was a good way to go because it was more like, it was more relationship. It was less adversarial. It was more trying to work together to get the best outcome for everybody, which was something that I enjoyed doing.
Which is a specialty of yours. Now, so how did you transition then from, your career at Downs Rackland over to state government? And what drew you to leaving private practice to serve the state of Vermont?
Yeah, so I actually, I came back to Vermont and I worked at Downs Rackland, and it was more of a personal decision. I was probably 27-ish, 27, 28, and I thought, oh geez, like maybe I'm not ready to be back in Vermont yet. Like I had a lot of friends in New York, and like, I was just sort of figuring things out in my personal life. I was trying to wrestle with accepting that I was gay, and like that's probably better to do in New York than in Burlington, Vermont. So there's a lot of personal considerations at the time. And I actually decided to go back to New York, and I was there for a couple of years until I got a phone call from the commissioner at the time at the Department of Financial Regulation, who said, we have this position opened up in Montpelier, a deputy commissioner of securities, and like you to, interview for it and think about it. And I was really interested in it because I was really interested at that time in the concept of crowdfunding. Like there's a thing called Indiegogo and other kind of crowdfunding based, platforms. And they had something similar in Vermont, this thing that was a local investment exemption that people used to invest in things like Ben and Jerry's and other companies. So I was really interested in those issues at the time, and I was wanting to come back to Vermont eventually. And I felt like, okay, now I'm ready to come back to Vermont, both professionally and personally. So I did, and that was the opportunity that drew me back. And I did it in government. And then I've been there ever since. I moved back, it was like February of 2014, I think. And both as the deputy commissioner, then the commissioner of that department, and then running for treasurer, the last 12 years or so, it's all been working in the state of Vermont.
Right. I know that's fascinating that you gave up the big dollars and, all of that to, give public service. So, I'm going to move on to your election as treasurer for the state of Vermont. Uh, Talk to us a little bit about what does a treasurer of Vermont do for my viewers who might not be familiar with that position? What does your job entail?
Yes, I mean, there are like some core things for our office, right? We manage the pension system. So when you have teachers and state employees and municipal workers who are eligible for the pension, we work to make sure they understand their pension benefits, that when it comes time to retire, that we sort of work through that process with them, that we administer their benefits appropriately, both the pension benefits and the healthcare benefits. We work with the legislature to make sure that the pensions are well funded and strong and secure. That was a big issue when I first became treasurer, and even a little bit before when I became treasurer, I served on this pension reform task force that was really doing important work and got the pensions moving in the right direction. We also have a division that basically pays all the state's bills. It's our operations division. So, everything from payroll to benefits to invoices for particular agencies, we're paying a considerable amount of money every year in the billions of dollars, because that's about the state budget, about $9 billion. So making sure those payments are on time and they're accurate, and people have the information that they need. And then also our unclaimed property division, another division focused on getting back the $150 million of unclaimed property that we hold for Vermonters. And that division's been doing a great job. We have really increased the number of claims quite a bit over the last 3 years. A couple of years ago, we had about 18,000 claims, and last year it was 32,000 claims. So we're getting a lot of money back to Vermonters, which is important. And then we have this other division that sort of started when I became treasurer called the Economic Empowerment Division. And that's where a lot of our recent initiatives live, like Vermont Saves, which is a publicly administered retirement initiative, our medical debt relief initiative to eliminate medical debt for thousands of Vermonters.
Yeah, let's talk about those because I want to dig deep into those because these fascinate me. And by the way, I don't know if my viewers know this about some of the things that you've done. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No.
I want to dig deep into some of this stuff. Recently, we're going to do them one at a time too. Recently, you announced a plan to eliminate up to $100 million in medical debt held by working and middle class Vermonters. Has this gone into effect, and how is it progressing?
Yeah, so the first step in the process, once we got the authority, was to enter into an agreement with an entity called Undue Medical Debt. So we just got that contract settled and negotiated about 6 weeks ago, and now they're negotiating with our hospitals to buy the medical debt and other healthcare professionals. So those negotiations are underway. We hope to have they'll come out in sort of rounds. We won't do it all at once because we'll sort of go hospital by hospital and medical facility by medical facility, and they'll roll out over the next 2 years or so. So we're hoping to have our first purchase and elimination here in the not too distant future.
And how many people will this touch? I mean, the medical debt in this state must be incredible because of the high medical bills. How many people
Yeah.
will this touch, do you think? What's your projection?
So our estimate was about 60 to 65,000 people would have relief. So it's going to be a huge, and one of the things that we love about it too is, you don't have to apply for it. Like we are doing a negotiation and then you'll get a letter in the mail that says, this was your medical debt held by this, hospital or this medical institution. And the state of Vermont, in partnership with Undue Medical Debt, has eliminated that for you. And then we'll have information also about ways to prevent, falling into medical debt through some of the other initiatives in Vermont in the future. So it just is like, I hope from my perspective, it's like government working at its best, where there's no administration, there's no bureaucracy, there's no eligibility in terms of you applying and having to make a determination. All of that is done in the background. There are certain income thresholds in terms of who's eligible for the relief. But all that's done in the background, and you get your bill saying your notice rather saying your bill has been eliminated.
But 65,000 people, I mean, this is one of the reasons why people end up on the street.
Yeah,
Is
no
because of
doubt.
medical
Number
debt.
one cause of bankruptcy, and in
Exactly.
Vermont, we pay for every if somebody is earning $5, $1 of every $5 you earn in Vermont is going toward your healthcare costs. It's one of the highest percentages in the country. So 20% of your pay is going to healthcare costs. So it's so easy for families to fall into medical debt and not be able to dig out of it. And it's not just people that are uninsured completely. There are, people in Vermont that are uninsured, and I worry that that number is going to increase with the changes in the
Absolutely.
government. But it's also people that are underinsured. Like one of the ways that people and businesses are trying to reduce the cost of the premiums, not necessarily the cost of healthcare, is to have these large deductible plans. So the first $10,000 is on the individual and not on the insurer. So in those cases, if all of a sudden you go to the emergency department, you're probably going to have your $10,000 deductible, taken with that one visit. And then do you have $10,000 to pay that bill? And it's just another way that even people that are insured fall into medical debt.
Now does this money come out of taxpayer dollars, or does the hospital reduce that debt? Do they take care of it and the hospital takes a hit, or does the
So
state
we
pay off the debt?
we got an appropriation from monies that had been previously appropriated to our office to reuse them for this,
Okay.
but it's about $1 million. I mean, the value of it is because it's older medical debt that hasn't been paid. So its economic value is really low. So we can buy it at a really low rate, but it has a big impact. I mean, both economically, it might be holding somebody back because of a lower credit score that's making them pay more in interest on credit cards or mortgage or auto loan. And also, on a healthcare standpoint, people that have medical debt, they are ashamed. They are feeling like they can't go see their provider because they owe them money. They're worried about collecting more medical debt. So it wipes the slate clean for them, and it shows that people are more likely to get the care that they need. So a whole variety of reasons to get this done, and it passed unanimously in the legislature, which
That's
we are all
outstanding. So to my
very.
viewers, I hope you rewind. I hope you understand the impact of this on the lives of Vermonters who are saddled with incredible medical debt that oftentimes puts them on the street with their children. So now let's move on, Mike, to the you expanded the 10% in Vermont program to invest over 100 million in new housing development, supporting over 1,100 additional housing units statewide. Where's this housing happening, and how is this program progressing? Because as you know, we have a terrible housing crisis. And could you address that issue as well, Mike?
Yeah, it's Melinda. I call it our number one economic issue, the shortage of housing, but I also call it our number one social issue because I think it's important for folks to understand that when I say it's our number one economic issue, it's not simply it's an issue for businesses and I shouldn't care about it because like I'm not worried about business. I'm worried about people. Well, it's also a people problem, right? So I think we have to keep that in perspective. But it's the number one economic issue from my perspective because every time you talk to an employer, they say, boy, we'd love to expand. We'd love to open a second location. We'd love to do more in our business, but we can't because we can't find the workers because they can't find the housing. So it's holding back the full potential of the Vermont economy. And it's also not just for-profit business owners, it's nonprofit business owners too. People that are serving Vermonters every day. Hospitals are having a really hard time finding doctors because it's the cost of living here in Vermont. And you hear from hospital CEOs who say, I give a new doctor an offer and they come back and say, we love your hospital, we love the community. But when I look at the offer, and take into account cost of living, it's about $30,000 more expensive to live here. Can you give me $30,000 more in the salary? And that hospital CEO describes being torn between reducing access to care in Vermont, because we need those doctors, and causing healthcare costs to go up even more in our state. So the fundamental issue there, is housing. And then on the social side, the number one cause of homelessness, when you look at the variables, a community that has a lower vacancy rate and a higher median rent is going to have more homelessness than a community that has a higher vacancy rate and a lower median rent. There's a direct connection between the amount of homelessness in a community and that amount of the cost of housing in that community. There's a book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem, where the professor and the author goes through all of the other things that could have a correlation. And he just finds that none of them correlate except for those factors. And here in Vermont, in the last 5 years, we've seen our vacancy rate go way down, and we've seen our median rents go up. And in every community, not just Burlington, but in every community, we've seen the struggle of homelessness really go to a place none of us have ever seen it before, including my hometown of Brattleboro.
Brattleboro. It's thank you so much for that explanation to my viewers. I think it was valuable. So, Mike, you also championed the passage of Vermont Saves, a simple, no-cost solution to help more than 80,000 Vermonters save for their future and achieve greater financial security in retirement. Explain this program for my viewers, and how can my viewers take advantage of Vermont Saves?
Yeah, so we're excited about this. It was our first initiative out of the legislature. It also passed unanimously, which we really appreciated, getting that kind of bipartisan support. And the idea here is that there are tens of thousands of Vermonters that work for nonprofit businesses, for-profit businesses, small businesses that don't have a retirement plan. And when you don't have access to retirement through your employer, all the data shows you just don't save for retirement. So you're working toward a future that's going to be less dignified. It's going to have less economic security. You're going to be worse off in retirement in terms of your standard of living than when you were working. So how can we create an easy way to create a vehicle for people to save for their future? And that is Vermont Saves. There's no cost to the business. There's no ongoing cost to taxpayers once it becomes sustainable. And we launched the program about a year ago. We were the fastest state to launch it from passage to open enrollment. And the reason we were able to do that is because we partnered with the state of Colorado to be able to get it set up. They had already had an established program. And it really shows the benefit of states working together to do more together than we could do individually. And right now, a year in, we have 5,300 people saving, 5,300 people. We have about 1,300 businesses in the program. We keep expanding that every week, and we're doing more outreach and more ways to get more people in the program. We hope within the first 5 years to get that number up to 20,000 people saving. But already with the 5,300, they've put aside about $5 million collectively, and that number will grow and grow and grow over time. And when I look at the numbers and the data, the thing that I love the most is those 5,300 people. 55% of them are under the age of 40, and 30% of them are under the age of 30. So a lot of young people saving when they have time on their side, and that money's going to grow, and they're going to have the biggest benefit and impact on this program. So it's something that we like to think about in our office. We call it finding programs that have a big impact without having a big price tag. But it's also a program that requires longer term thinking and vision, because this is not something that is going to benefit our economy or our budget or these folks necessarily next year or the year after. It's a long-term program. But when people start retiring in 10, 20, 30 years and they have hundreds of thousands of dollars they wouldn't have otherwise had, that's going to be a big deal for them. They're going to be less dependent on the government in their retirement. They're going to have more of an impact on our economy. So we are really excited about the early year, the first year of this program.
Well, bless you. This is an extraordinary. So just very quickly, how do my viewers get into this
Yeah.
program?
So there's the website Vermont Saves. You can do it both through your employer, like your employer who does not offer retirement is required to sign up, and then
Okay.
you're enrolled in the program. But you can also sign up as an individual that does not have access to retirement as well. So if you go to our website, Vermont Saves, you can see information about how you can apply and get in as an individual. But also, if you work for a business or a nonprofit who isn't yet enrolled in it, encouraging your boss, your HR director, whoever it might be, to make sure they know about this program and talk to our office about it. It's really easy to enroll and really an efficient program.
Fantastic. That's Vermont Saves to my viewers. And the website is again vermontsaves.org or
It would be .gov. It's a government
.gov.
website, but we
Okay. So
yeah.
vermontsaves.gov.
If you go to our treasurer's website, there are links to the Vermont Saves.
And the treasurer's website is what? So my viewers can write it down. What is
If you
that?
just type in Vermont State Treasurer, it
All
will
right.
come up
It'll
as
come
the
right up. Okay. To
yeah.
my viewers, get right on that. Okay. Start saving when you're young, really. As a retiree, I can't inspire you more. All right. You had to step. So this is, I love this question. You had to step into the shoes of Beth Pierce, who served as treasurer for many years, and she's so deeply revered by many. Talk to us a little bit about what Beth did to pave the way for the work that you were doing. And by the way, to my viewers, when Mike Pieciak ran for Beth's job as treasurer after she announced her retirement, Mike won the election for treasurer by 62%. I also want you to talk to my viewers about why you resonate so powerfully with Vermont citizens.
Well, with Beth, she was really supportive and wonderful. She was thinking about not running again. She came and talked to me, maybe 8 months or 6 months before she made a final decision, and she said, I want you to think about running. And it took me a little while to think about that, and we had a couple of different conversations, and then she decided she was not going to run, and she wanted to support me, and she wanted me to run. And it's one of those things where, if you didn't get that kind of support, you wonder if you would have done it. So it was so impactful to me to get that. And she had done a lot of great work in our office on the pension system that I mentioned, trying to get that in a better position. She had been working on this Vermont Saves program, but in a different iteration. And then just overall, like the respect that our office had under her leadership in the legislature really has served me well as we've stepped into that role. So, like so many people, like you just stand on the work and the shoulders of those folks that come before you. And that was definitely the case with Beth. So we tried to, take the work that she had done, continue it forward, and then add on sort of the vision that I had for ways that the office could be involved in the economy and in people's lives. When I ran for treasurer the first time, we made an effort to get to every single town in Vermont. We visited all 251 towns. We called it the Road to Victory because Victory, Vermont was our last town that we visited. And there's something to that, both as a political campaign, but also as an elected official, like getting to every corner of the state, having conversations in every single town in the state to hear what people are worried about. Is why we prioritized housing when I got into office, and why we expanded that program you mentioned by $100 million and focused on housing, because that was the conversation that came up every single community. So it's really important to be out and hearing from people. I also think it's really important to be accessible to voters the best that you can. It's why we've held town halls this year. It's why I go to so many different events across the state, because you want people to know you as a person, and they know that they can reach out to you in your office, and they know who you are and what you stand for and what motivates you to do the work that we do. Because I think there's so limited trust in government. There's so limited trust in politicians that we need to be out and show people that we're real people and we care about them and that we're going to work to solve their problems, because that's what they care about. There's so much else in politics that is a distraction, and
We're gonna get into that, and people love you. You are out and about. And so let's move into our current state of affairs, Mike. You are one of the most inspiring and go-to speakers on the public stage. You were asked to speak at most of the major rallies around the state. So, what are your words of wisdom and inspiration for our citizenry that says over and over again, I am so lucky to be living in Vermont? Why do we all feel that way?
Yeah, I feel that way too. And I think, why do I feel that way? Because I remember the first few days in January of 2025, and I felt really alone. I was at home. I was watching MSNBC. It was the days after the Trump inauguration. They had a whole slate of things that they were doing right out of the gate. There was discussion about how he had poll numbers that were like people seemed to be approving of what he was doing. And I just felt like, wow, I feel isolated and alone, both because I'm physically alone watching this, but I guess I'm like in the minority of people who think this is not our country and these are not the policies and these are not the values that we hold. And then in January, just a couple of days later, there was sort of this spontaneous gathering at the State House, and there were about 1,000 people that came together. There was no speeches. It was sort of just this at lunchtime. People said they're going to come together, and I had heard about it, and I went down and was there with everybody, and I didn't feel alone anymore. I felt like, okay, there are thousands of Vermonters, maybe hundreds here at this event, but there are thousands of Vermonters that feel the same thing I'm feeling and have the same concerns that I have. And every time I've gone to one of those rallies or public events and we, share our mutual concern in the direction of the country, I feel better and I don't feel alone. And I feel like we're maintaining and building that sense of community that we have in Vermont, which for me is why I say thank God I live in Vermont.
Here you go. Thank you so much. We're so grateful that you live in Vermont and that you came back to us. So I also want to talk about Burlington because, there's this whole thing, there's a whole vibe out there about people who are worried about Burlington. They're afraid to come to Burlington. And I go into the Queen City several times a week because I love Burlington and I believe that it needs our support. It is very beautiful and it's vibrant, and we have to support our local businesses that need us. But people fear going into Burlington. So how do we change the minds and encourage people to support our great city on the shores of Lake Champlain? I think you do you live in Burlington now?
I live in Winooski, but
Well, that's close enough. But talk
frequently
to
in
us a little
Burlington.
bit about how do we turn the tide on this of people. I know we have the Building Burlington's Future group, which is phenomenal. But what are your thoughts
Yeah.
about helping our city turn around?
I think there's always like the perception issue that you have to work on, and then like the actual on the ground substantive issue. And the substantive issues feed into the perceptions, like they go hand in hand. But people, from 10 years ago when I moved to the area, there's definitely a lot more visible homelessness than when I was here. There's more um, people that are having mental health issues visibly in downtown, and for a lot of people, that can be very concerning. Now, when you travel around the state and you travel around the country and the region, like these are issues that every community is facing. It's not unique to Burlington, but it does stem from some of the challenges we have around housing and mental health access. So there are substantive things that we have to do and change and improve upon, both for those individuals and for the businesses and for the community as a whole, because there are community members, again, who feel this perception that it's unsafe and they can't use this gem, this community asset of Church Street in downtown Burlington. So some of those, underlying issues certainly have to be worked on, but then the perception thing also has to be worked on, like the reality of how safe Vermont is and Burlington is and downtown Burlington is. When you actually go and spend a Friday night there, or you go and spend a Saturday night or a Saturday afternoon, like it's a wonderful, peaceful, enjoyable place. And that perception is so important, because if people start pulling back, then it's going to seem less welcoming, because all your sort of the folks that are having these experiencing homelessness and having mental health issues, like they're the ones that are there and the only people that you see. But when everyone is there, that's the dominant thing. There's life here downtown, and people are coming It's an enjoyable, safe place to be. So there's certainly issues that have to be worked on. They're not all that different from issues that cities like Burlington are dealing with across the country. But then you also have to work on the perception thing. I think, you know, having organizations that are highlighting the great things happening in downtown, drawing people to downtown. I did my Christmas shopping in downtown. You know, all those things you can do to get people to come is really important.
But we don't have that happening in Montpelier. I mean, people don't feel that way in Montpelier or Virgins or Bristol or I mean, this seems to be, in Burlington because I guess there's more maybe that's going on for people's minds to wrap around. But at the end of the day, I'd like to see the state of Vermont step in and, help out. It is the largest city in the state, and I think it produces the highest revenue.
No
And,
doubt.
and I'd love to see the state step up and make more of an effort to either support a real public campaign or whatever. So that's my little bit of,
Well, true. I mean,
you
it
know,
is
yeah.
the key to, I mean, our economy is driven by tourism is a huge part of our economy. And downtown Burlington and Church Street, is a huge part of the tourism industry. And once that starts to go, that's a big issue for the entire state. And UVM is a huge importer of students and money and jobs. And like if that starts to go because people feel unsafe about downtown Burlington, that's a big issue.
Well, what about
So
Canadians? What about the fact that
for
we've
sure.
lost? How do we encourage Canadians to feel safe coming across the border?
No doubt. I mean, that's a big issue. I mean, I just got an email this morning from somebody that lives in Canada that said that they appreciated an interview I had done recently about Canada and how Canadians feel even more concerned after the military operation in Venezuela about the United States and where the United States is heading toward. And they just basically said, they said like, we're not coming back to the United States. They said that not just during his presidency, but forever was his point of view. Now, hopefully, he'll
Oh,
change his mind over time. But I understand. I mean, all I can say is I understand their concern and their frustration and their anger. And all we can do is continue to extend an open arm for whenever they're
absolutely.
ready to come back.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bernie needs to go up there and spend some time. So to expand on this, I want to, how can we best fight against the horrors that are being played out in our major cities? The murder of Renee Good that you spoke out on in the last rally this last weekend. Um, this horror has absolutely devastated the country. So, what are we to do to combat authoritarianism and fascism and the rise of Trump and the corruption of the regime? Because our freedoms are being ripped away from so many of us, and we're numb, and people
Right.
are really scared and frustrated, and it's like, what can we do? So, for Mike Pieciak, what are your words of wisdom for my
Yeah.
viewers on how we all deal with this time?
I think that idea of being numb, I think that's really important to think about because ultimately, like what we can't do is normalize what's happening. And I think you feel numb to it when it becomes more normal. You see an incident that happens and you're shocked by it. But then the second time it happens, and the third time, and the fourth time, and you become less shocked to the point, well, then it's just normal. This is what happens in our country. So I think making sure we keep that sense of concern, which is honestly hard for a lot of us because you can't always live in that state just from your own mental health and physical health. I try to find the balance of being tuned in, but not having it overwhelm my thinking and my existence because you have to be able to preserve your mental health. So I think that's one important thing. I think the other thing is just what Vermonters are doing, like this idea of showing up and speaking out and being together and doing it publicly. There's real value and importance in that because it's not simply about you showing up. It's like you're showing up for other people. You're powerful together. People that aren't even there at the protest see it and they feel like, oh, good, I'm glad. Like in Vermont, we're showing up, we're doing this. And then ultimately, I have conversations with, Vermonters about this, and they say, why can't we just do something? Why can't something be done? And the ultimate issue here is that Donald Trump and Republicans have the power of our government. They are in power. They have won the election. So ultimately, it's about elections, and like 2026 will be a critical midterm election to take some of that power back, take some of that power back of our government, and then you can start talking about actually doing things with the power of the government to push back on this. Right now, it's the power of the people because we don't have the power of the government. And there are things certainly we can do, but ultimately we have to be focused on getting that power back in terms of the operation of the government.
Right, and many of us are fearful and of that, that we won't have a fair election. I don't feel that way. I think there'll be enough people coming out that even if they try to finagle things, and I think that there'll be enough people to, and we all have to remember that Richard Nixon in his second term won all the states, and within a year and a half he was gone. So,
Right.
um, so now I know you have been approached many times. You've been cajoled, inspired, and often begged to consider running for the governor of Vermont. Now, most of us feel, I feel that you're ready. So, what are your plans? I mean, if you want to share anything with us, do you have any plans of seeking higher office in the state of Vermont?
Well, when I think about um, my current role, when I think about like this idea of giving back to the community and giving back to to Vermont and like where you can best be served, there's certainly a lot of work we're doing in our office. There's a lot of good work I want to keep doing. There's programs we have that we want to see through to the end and actually, not just talk about the impact they will have, but to see that impact through. So there's a lot of important work that we're engaged with. At the same time, when I look around and think, okay, like what is an office that has the most opportunity to help Vermonters? I think it's the governor's office. The governor's office is a powerful force for good. It can be really engaged in a way that no other office in Vermont can. And we have so many issues that we need to address. Like this next decade of Vermont, I think is going to be really like the most important decade we've seen maybe in the history of the state because there are so many fundamental issues about how do we help people afford to live here and how do we build the economy that will be sustainable in the future and a healthcare system that's affordable and a school system that's high quality but also affordable. So there are a lot of issues that are unaddressed. Whether what I do this year, still there's still time to be seen, but I'm perfectly um, focused and happy on the work at the treasurer's office because there is, I think, so much impact to be
And I,
had.
and I and I don't mean to put pressure on you, but I know that when there are silent circles and we're all together, me and my friends, your name pops right up top. So just so you know,
Well,
um,
all I'll say, I mean, I'm humbled by
well, you know that. I mean, you're
the
so
outreach.
beloved. So to my viewers, I want you to know that Mike and that I am so deeply impressed with all that you have done, not just in your life, but also in our state's government to serve the people who need the most. Your heart is golden, and you are truly a most compassionate, brilliant, and visionary leader. Thank you, Mike Pieciak, for being on my show and for taking the time to talk to my viewers. This has been a real delight. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate having the opportunity.
All right. And to my viewers, I will see you soon. Bye bye.